Hello everybody, this is Daryl Whitman with Destinationwvftv. Thank you for watching. My wife and I recently completed a 7-day Greek Isle cruise on the Norwegian Jade, embarking from Athens, Greece. This video will provide an overview of the cruise from beginning to end. For us, it was a cruise we'll always remember. There were plenty of highlights and a few lowlights as well, but overall, it was a great experience. So sit back and relax as we take you on our journey. And while you're watching, if you like the video and other content we have on our channel, please subscribe to our channel. We have a lot more exciting content planned, so without further ado, let's get started. We booked this trip in January of 2022, well over a year prior to the cruise. That's typically my MO. I like to book them early. It was the second of 3 consecutive cruises we booked on Norwegian Cruise Lines. The first was a 7-day Alaskan cruise in September of 2022 on the Norwegian Encore. The Greek Isle cruise we are showcasing in this video, as I mentioned, was the second, and the third will be a 7-day inter-island Hawaiian cruise in August of this year. The Greek Isle cruise was a group cruise with about 35 passengers. We actually preferred the group cruise in this case since we were going to Europe for the first time. We didn't want to go as lone wolves, and we'd actually sailed with this group a few years back, so we were familiar with them. It just made it more comfortable for us. Our trip originated in Dallas. We flew from DFW International Airport to Atlanta on Delta. We had about a 4-hour layover in Atlanta, then flew nonstop to Athens. It was about a 10 or 11-hour flight. It was the longest flight me and my wife have ever taken. However, it was a nice, smooth flight, and the meals on Delta were right on point. We had no complaints about the flight at all. We did do Comfort Plus, so we had a little more leg room and the seats were a little more roomier, and that certainly helped. Once we landed in Athens, we had to pass through customs, then on to pick up our luggage, and off to meet our transportation to our hotel. We actually booked our transportation through Viator ahead of time, so our driver was supposed to meet us at an area of the airport designated for pickup. This was interesting. Very interesting. When we arrived in the area, there were dozens of drivers. There were signs up with the names of their passengers. It was a bit chaotic, to say the least. I worked my way through the chaos as best I could, but I didn't see our names anywhere. By the time I worked my way back to my wife, she had spotted our driver, and we made our way out of there and headed to the hotel. Our hotel of choice was the Athens Marriott, the group hotel. When we arrived, our room wasn't ready yet because we'd gotten there early. So we stowed our luggage with the hotel and got something to eat. We were starving by that point, so we needed to eat. In addition, we met up with others in the group who had arrived, and we discussed our flights and plans in Athens and the cruise until our rooms were ready. The hotel was nice. One of the things I really liked as far as the staff was concerned was that they spoke English. I was impressed about this throughout our experience. Most of the interactions we had, no matter where, in Greece, Israel, Turkey, the people there spoke pretty good English. I really appreciated that because I was terrified when we got there, and even before we got there, that we would have a communication problem. You know, overseas they speak their language and we speak ours, but we didn't have any issues really with that at all during the whole trip, basically. It did not take long for our rooms to be ready. When we got to our room, we proceeded to unpack, get comfortable, get in the bed, and go to sleep. We certainly needed it. That flight had taken something out of us, and we were tired and needed time to recover. Funny thing, when I woke up, I thought it was the next day and proceeded to get dressed for a tour we had scheduled. My wife caught me and asked me what I was doing and told me it was still Friday, the same day. That's how screwed up I was with the time difference. Athens is 8 hours ahead of Dallas time. I got right back in the bed for sure. So Friday was a rest day, which it was intended to be all along. When we left Dallas, it was Thursday, but when we arrived in Athens, it was Friday. Nothing scheduled for today, except rest. That's exactly what we did. On Saturday, we scheduled a tour to the Acropolis outside of our group. This is something we'd been looking forward to ever since we booked our cruise, and the day was finally here. The tour bus met us at our hotel. We were pleased to see that the bus was actually a bus and not a shuttle. It was air conditioned and comfortable, and as it turns out, all the buses on all the tours we took were the same. That was a definite plus. So we boarded the bus, and after we made it a couple of stops to pick other folks up, it was off to the Acropolis. For me, this was what I thought would be the highlight of the trip. The Acropolis is something I wanted to see because of its historical and biblical significance to the world. Once we arrived, we got some instructions from our tour guide and we made our way to the site. What I really wasn't prepared for was the fact that we'd be climbing a hill to get there. It was a continuous uphill climb and it was a bit taxing to say the least. We stopped a few times to get some history from the tour guide and then continued to climb until we reached the top. In the interim, I happened to lose my wife. That's right, I lost my wife. Well, I'm sure you're asking, how did I lose my wife? I'm glad you asked that question. While we were headed up the hill with our group, I wanted to get some pictures I thought would be nice. I told my wife to stay with the group and keep your eyes on the tour guide. Keep your eyes on the tour guide. I turned around and proceeded to take my pictures for probably no more than a couple of minutes. When I went to re-engage with my wife and the group, I found the group, but my wife was not with them. Panic set in, and I started looking around for her while keeping contact with the group. Did I say panic set in? Panic set in. I didn't see her anywhere. I asked the tour guide if he'd seen her, and he said no, but then added she would probably meet us back at the bus. Okay, but that really didn't work for me. I tried calling her and texting her, but to no avail. I continued looking around, scanning the grounds, and the area was a big area and spread out with probably a few thousand people out there at that time. Well, while the group was making its way up the hill, I happened to look over to my left, and coming down the hill was my wife. I sprinted over to catch her before she got too far away from me. And with that, we continued on with the group. The Acropolis was everything we thought it would be. We were amazed at how the ruins had been maintained and how large the structures were. It always amazes us the technology they must have had at that time to build these structures. You would think it wouldn't be possible. We felt the same way about the ancient Mayan ruins we saw in Mexico. Huge structures. It's just amazing to us. The views also from the Acropolis were amazing. We had two more stops to make: the Olympic Stadium and the Acropolis Museum. The stop at the Olympic Stadium was only for a few minutes, probably about 10 to 15 minutes, long enough for us to take a few pictures and look around for a moment. So after about 10 or 15 minutes, we got back on the bus and continued on our way to the Acropolis Museum. Now, me and my wife didn't originally sign up for the Acropolis Museum. I thought we would be dropped off at our hotel before the stop at the museum when I booked the tour. There really weren't any instructions that said anything to the contrary, and I just didn't think that it would be anything different. But that wasn't the case. We would have had to find our own transportation back to the hotel from the museum area. I didn't count on that, so we decided to hang with the group and tour the museum. We had to pay for our admission when we got there since we hadn't prepaid with the tour, but that wasn't a problem. We had euros ready to go. Once we did, we rejoined the group and made our way through the museum. The museum was incredible. There were pieces there that astounded us. Unfortunately, we couldn't take as many pictures as we wanted and video because in parts of the museum it wasn't allowed. But we thoroughly enjoyed the experience and we were really glad we went through with the tour. When visiting Athens, make sure to make a stop by the Acropolis Museum. We highly recommend it. And with that, our tours for the day were done. We were taken back to our hotel to settle in for the rest of the day. Embarkation day was finally here. We checked out of the hotel and proceeded to the lobby to wait for our transportation to the cruise port. Again, I pre-booked our transportation with Viator. Our transportation arrived right on time and we were on our way. And by the way, the port that we were at in Athens is called Piraeus Cruise Port. I still don't know if I'm saying that right. I actually asked one of our drivers the actual pronunciation of that, and he said something different. and I still couldn't pronounce it. So until I get it right, for the purpose of this video, it's Piraeus Port. That's where we were headed. Once at the port, the porters met us at the car and took our bags for us. We were directed to the area where we would check in and board the ship, and waited for our boarding group to be called. The boarding area was nice in that it was very open, and we weren't all crushed together like in some ports that we've been to. Once our group was called, we proceeded to check in. The process was smooth, easy, and efficient, and we had no issues. We did get our cabin keys at check-in, but the cabins weren't ready yet, which is typical, so we made our way to the Garden Cafe, the buffet, to eat some lunch. After lunch and just chilling for a few, we made our way to our muster station and completed our security briefing. After our briefing, we just found an area of the ship and hung out until our cabins were ready. Once the announcement was made that they were ready, we made our way to our cabin to settle in. Here's our impression of our cabin. We were on deck 10, cabin 576. We had a balcony cabin and the category was BA. Remember, we were on the Norwegian Jade, which was an older ship originally built in 2006. It was refurbished in 2022. There was very little counter space and only 3 drawers. The hanging space in the closet was minimal, at least for me and my wife. There was more shelf space than anything, which I'm not a fan of. I prefer drawers and hanging space, but we managed to make it work for the week. The bathroom was small with a slider for the toilet and shower for privacy. The cabin overall was a little tight, but it had enough room for us to maneuver around. The balcony was pretty standard in terms of size, and it included a table and 2 chairs. I didn't take any video of the room, but I'm going to put a link to a video by a woman named Amy Kay of the cabin in the comments. Check it out because it's a very good representation of our cabin on the Norwegian Jade. Our first port stop on our cruise was Kusadasi, Turkey. But today we will actually be in 2 ports, Kusadasi, Turkey and Patmos, Greece later in the evening. Let's talk about Kusadasi first. Kusadasi in the ancient Greek world was known for the city of Ephesus. We did not take a tour in Kusadasi, but we did get off the ship and venture out around the port. There were a few shops and eateries around the port. Of course, the local merchants were all trying to get you to come into their stores and establishments. I take it rugs are a big thing there. They were really pushing for us to see them. Cab drivers were all lined up wanting to take you somewhere, and they were a bit pushy for our taste, not taking any cab rides anywhere in Turkey. Sorry, no thanks, it's not happening. Outside of that, the port area was nice, the weather was nice, and the views were nice. There was actually a castle in the distance, but we didn't walk that far. I don't know if it was a tourist attraction or not. There was another shipping port alongside us, which was cool. I really like seeing that visual. Overall, the Kusadasi port stop was pretty relaxing. It was a short port stop, 6:30 a.m. to 12 p.m., then off to Patmos. We arrived in Patmos at about 6:30 p.m. It was another short port stop. We had to anchor at sea and take a tender to shore. Originally, we weren't planning to go ashore, but changed our minds later on. We were glad we did. The tender only took about 10 minutes to get to shore. There were quite a few with our group who also went with us. Patmos, for those who don't know, is known in biblical history as the island where John the theologian is said to have written the book of Revelations. The word that comes to mind when I think of Patmos is charming. The cobblestone streets, the quaint shops, the outdoor dining, the housing, and even the kids riding their bikes through the streets and through the tourists all add to the charm. Here's our video short of Patmos we took while on the island. Check this out. What do you think? We really enjoyed Patmos. Next, we were off to Israel. Our first port was Ashod, Israel. I'd never heard of Ashod, Israel, so we didn't really know what to expect, but it turns out that Ashod is Israel's sixth largest city and its largest port. Here's where we started our tour of biblically historical churches and sites. But before we got there, our tour guide had a surprise stop for us. In the middle of nowhere in Ashod, Israel, rising out of the desert, was an Elvis Presley themed restaurant. Yep, couldn't believe it. It was kind of cool though. The stop also served as a maintenance stop for everybody. Most picked up something to eat, got drinks, took a bathroom break, etc. I took the pictures that you're viewing now because I thought it was so unusual. Okay, look, I know Elvis was big, to some the biggest ever, but a restaurant like this, you just don't expect to see in the middle of nowhere in a foreign country. There's a first time for everything, I guess. In Jerusalem, we started with the view from the Mount of Olives. There was a spectacular view of Old City Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. The first church we visited was the Church of All Nations. It was a beautiful church. The Church of All Nations, standing near the foot of the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, is built over the rock on which Jesus is believed to have prayed in agony the night before he was crucified. The church and the adjacent Garden of Gethsemane, with its 8 ancient olive trees, provide an evocative place for meditation, especially when visited at night. Our tour of Jerusalem then moved to the Old City Jerusalem. Our next stop was the Western Wall, or as we know it, the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is a portion of ancient limestone wall in the Old City of Jerusalem that forms part of the larger retaining wall of the hill known to Jews and Christians as the Temple Mount. The interesting thing here is that there is a side for men and a side for women. The men and women do not pray together at this site. So, from the Western Wall or Wailing Wall, whatever you prefer to call it, we made our ways to our next site, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, also in Old City Jerusalem. The site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is identified as a place of both the crucifixion and the tomb of Jesus. The site was actually packed with tourists, making it very hard to get in and move about. My wife didn't even go in, it was so crowded. I went in but didn't make it upstairs to take any pictures or video. I did get a few downstairs, but due to time constraints, didn't get to circle the tomb of Jesus. Regardless, it was still an awesome sight to see, and to just be in the area where it's believed Jesus was crucified and buried was more than enough for me. After we completed our visit to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Old City Jerusalem, it was on to Bethlehem. Our next historical site was the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. The site is identified by Christian tradition as the birthplace of Jesus since the 2nd century. The entrance to the church was a small door that required you to bow down in order to enter. It's called the Door of Humility. The Church of the Nativity was our final stop for the day. Time to head back to the ship. This was the longest of our tour days. It was over 10 hours from start to finish. Today, we will be visiting Haifa, Nazareth, the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan River. We started our day in Haifa. We rode up Mount Carmel in Israel to see the spectacular views below, and they were spectacular. We even had a great view of the port with our cruise ship. It was just beautiful. We had a great view of the Baha'i Gardens as well. The biblical significance of Mount Carmel was that in the books of Kings, Elijah challenges 450 prophets of Baal to a contest at the altar on Mount Carmel to determine whose deity was genuinely in control of the kingdom of Israel. When our visit to Mount Carmel was done, we headed to Nazareth. Our first stop in Nazareth was the Basilica of the Annunciation. The Basilica of the Annunciation in Nazareth commemorates the place where the angel Gabriel visited Mary and delivered the invitation for her to bear God's Son. It was established over what Catholic tradition holds to be the site of the house of the Virgin Mary. Following our visit to the Basilica of the Annunciation, we trekked through Nazareth to the Church of St. Joseph. According to an ancient tradition, it is believed the church was built over the house and workshop of St. Joseph. This would have been the home of Mary and Joseph following their marriage. The church also goes by the names Church of Nutrition and the Church of Joseph's Carpentry. It's considered the place where the Holy Family lived together for 30 years and Jesus grew to adulthood. There was also a statue of St. Joseph on the site. We were told that there is a Catholic tradition that burying a statuette of St. Joseph on the grounds of a home will help you sell or buy a house. This tradition became so popular through the internet that some American realtors bought them by the gross. Our next stop took us to a much anticipated site and one with major biblical significance. Welcome to Yardenit, the baptismal site on the Jordan River. Of course, the Jordan River is where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. My wife was particularly excited to see it. She's a minister and she wanted to dip her toes in, as did a lot of people in our group. She got to do a lot more than that. Here's a little video of the Jordan River and video of my wife walking in it. That was awesome, wasn't it? We sure thought it was. The next stop for the day was the Church of the Multiplication, or the Church of Loaves and Fishes in Tabgha on the Sea of Galilee. I'm sure I just butchered that city's name, but that's where we were. This is the site where Jesus performed the miracle of feeding over 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Tabgha, on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, is best known for Christ's miraculous multiplication of loaves and fish to feed a multitude. But it is also remembered for Jesus' third appearance to his disciples after his resurrection, when he tested and commissioned St. Peter as leader of his church. The Church of the Beatitudes was our next stop. The church is located on a small hill overlooking the Sea of Galilee, the traditional mount on which Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is a collection of sayings spoken by Jesus of Nazareth, found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7, that emphasizes his moral teachings. Just outside the church is the Sea of Galilee. Interesting fact, the Sea of Galilee isn't a sea at all. It's actually a lake. Yes, a lake. That was news to me. The picture you're viewing now is me and my wife in front of the Sea of Galilee. It's my favorite picture from the whole trip. The Sea of Galilee completed our tours for the day. Time to board the bus for the ride back to the Norwegian Jade. Our next port was Limassol, Cyprus. We did not do any tours here, and you couldn't walk the port because it was more of a commercial port, not really a cruise ship port. So we stayed on the ship and just relaxed. Here are some images from around the ship that we took that day. Well, we'd finally reached our final port for the cruise, Santorini, Greece. We were especially excited to see Santorini because we were enamored with the images we see on TV and in media of the blue domes. We couldn't wait to see them. The ship anchored at sea and we had to take a tender to shore. We then boarded a bus to take us up the side of a mountain. It was a scary ride. The road was narrow, the bus was big, the mountain was high, and the sea was just below us. Well, once we got to the top of the mountain, our first stop was Santos Wines. There was a wine tasting available of their various wines if you wanted to partake in it. They had a store where you could purchase wines and either take it with you or have it shipped to you. We stayed here for about an hour, I guess. We then boarded the bus and headed to the main attraction, the Blue Domes. By now, we were really excited. It's what we came to see. The tour guide led us to the square with the shops and pointed us in the direction of the Blue Domes. She did not come with us, which we thought was odd. We stopped and looked in shops along the way as we made our way uphill. The amount of walking uphill on this trip was just unreal. Anyway, we continued until we saw a Blue Dome. The totality of the Blue Domes in the area was 3. 3. That was a huge disappointment. The way we see Santorini advertised on TV, print media, social media would seem to show that there were a lot more than just 3 Blue Domes. But that was the reality. Most in the group were disappointed by that. Oh well, we came and we saw, and then we headed back to the bus. Interesting thing on the way back was that the bus did not take us back to where we originally boarded the bus. Instead, we were taken to another point on the mountain and dropped off. We then had to walk to either a gondola that would take you down the mountain in about 3 minutes or so, or you had to walk down 700 steps, steep steps down the mountain. We chose the gondola. My wife closed her eyes most of the way down, and I did a little bit too. The gondola ride was kind of shaky, but we made it in one piece. We boarded our tender and headed back to the ship. That concluded our tours for this cruise. We'd seen a lot. I didn't really grasp the enormity of all we'd seen and done until after we got back and I started putting our Shutterfly book together to preserve our memories. This was the first trip where I ever needed 2 books. I took over 750 pictures, and that doesn't even include the videos. I like to document. All that was left for us to do was to get ready for the next day to embark from the ship and head home. We sailed to Athens, Greece overnight. This embarkation was relatively painless. We always do self-assist so we can get off the ship quickly. We pre-arranged transportation from the port to the hotel through Viator, and it arrived in fairly short order. We stayed in Athens 1 additional night and flew home on Delta the following day. It was a long trip, our longest to date, 12 days. But it was time to go home. My wife and I always quote the line from The Wizard of Oz, "There's no place like home." If you made it to the end, thank you. I invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow us on our journeys. We will be featuring on our next cruise in August a 7-day inter-island Hawaiian cruise. We love to have you be a part of our family and follow us as we go. Again, thank you, and we'll see you on the next edition of Destination WVF TV. Bye. This is Daryl Whitman. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Destination WVF TV.